All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Tyler Bradley at Bradley Vineyards in Elkton. It's August 21st, 2019. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tyler. The important question, why wine?
I was born into it is the easy answer. My father and mother started in the wine industry before I was born, and I was exposed to wine before I knew what was even going on, and so I came by it very honestly, I guess, is the short answer.
But you didn't take a direct route here, so tell us about kind of leaving and what made you decide to come back.
Sure. So I grew up in Elkton. Elkton is a very small town, rural community in Oregon. The town itself is about 200 people and hasn't changed since I was born, you know. And the surrounding area, the zip code is probably 1,500, 2,000 people. It's very small. And I've always loved it, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that my parents were very good about pushing me to see more of the world than just my immediate surroundings. So I was encouraged to not just go to, undergraduate, but I went to Oregon State, not very far away, but I was also encouraged to see the world, and they facilitated travels at an early age, and again encouraged me beyond even college. Even during college, they encouraged me to do what I wanted to do versus what I may inherit someday. Even so, at Oregon State, I declared I spent a good year or so as an enology viticulture major, and then shifted per my parents' encouragement because I was challenged and I had scholarships to meet, and science is a tough one, and I do love science and am science-minded, but C's were difficult for a scholarship, and while my academic advisor was like, C's are how science works, C's pass, I was like, I gotta get through with some money still. So I ended up switching to what my focus was a lot in high school and college was leadership development through the Future Farmers of America. And so I went into speech communication, was hired by the National FFA organization, and then did quite a bit of work for them, especially in the summer times in DC, kind of leadership development stuff, which led me to my early career in Indianapolis of curriculum development for their leadership programs. And that just opened a door for me in a bigger world, and I started to walk through different opportunities that sort of climbed me up the corporate ladder, and I moved to Chicago and then back to Indianapolis, and then ultimately back here when my dad passed away. I was called to rise to the occasion and keep things rolling and apply, I guess, the foundation that I didn't know was there from my youth, and also the education and skill sets that I'd acquired in my early career. I think those were the bigger priority. Dad and I talked a lot about coming home under a capacity in which maybe I'd market wine or sell wine or something along those lines. So he recognized, and both of my parents recognized, that my skill sets weren't going to necessarily be what he knew of farming, but that maybe I could add value to our repertoire.
So when you left, when you started working back east, Midwest, did you have the inclination that you would come back at some point? Was that kind of in the back of your head?
It was certainly in the back of my head, though it was a scary place to visit. I was afraid that I was too big for this place, that I'd seen too much and couldn't come back to a simple place like Elkton. However, these crossroads that I'd hit at these corporate gigs, it would always come down to a conversation with my dad and I talking about, there's always a place for you. We'll figure out where you are here if you want to come home. And again, I would just be a little too afraid, I think, and or maybe stubborn, that I wanted to find my own path at that time. But you know, it turns out that this is my natural rhythm. You know, I had no idea that what I thought was I'd outgrown is actually exactly where I belong. And it took a couple years, maybe 3, to like really feel reconnected with this place. But it is, I've never disliked it, and I love it even more than I did when I was growing up.
So take me back to you lost your father. You're coming back. You're not exactly sure what your role is going to be, if you're going to want to be there. When you decide that that's something you're gonna try to take over, tell me about the next step for you, learning how to do what you now do.
So I came out for Dad's service and was like, I'm staying. Like I don't need to go back. I'll figure all that. I'll go back to pack up, but I'll just stay. I was still employed in Indianapolis at the time, and I was ready to just walk. And per my mother's and family's insistence, it was like, go wrap things up and decide. Take a few months, we have time. It was January, so everything was dormant in the vineyard, and we had a few months, and I knew leaving that I would be back, and that was I was going back to Indiana to put my ducks in a row so I could come home. I was dating someone at the time. We were pretty newly dating. That really threw us for a whirlwind, being, you know, having lost my dad, who was he was my hero, and then deciding I'm moving across the country, and she decided to attach onto that, and we made the move together. It was the most challenging thing I'd ever done. It didn't work out, you know, our relationship didn't work out. Because it was just a little too much to handle, but it was scary. I was very unsure that I could even handle it. About 2 weeks before moving to Elkton, I get a call, a month before. I'd made the decision I'm coming to Elkton, and I was offered a position with another winery in Elkton. And it was a very entry-level, non-frilly position that I was like, great, at least I'll get an hourly paycheck, and I'll be able to somehow figure out how to carve out a position for myself at Bradley. And 2 weeks before coming, the competitor, River's Edge Winery, offered me a more attractive salaried position. And I said I would love to, except that I've already accepted a position. And I'm just like this small town dynamic coming back, where I'm like, I'm polite and I've already accepted something. I'm like, what do I do? And he's like, just say you got a better offer. Haven't you been in the world, you know? So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I said that, and he understood, and that was that. I became River's Edge's assistant winemaker, and Mike and Vonnie being biochemists who are natural and or trained, you know, teachers. It's just been a perfect fit. I'm a learner, and I minored in chemistry. I love science, though I didn't get the best grades in it, and they're phenomenal teachers. And Dad always said that if I wanted to do this, the hard part of like the vines being established and the wine process being established, the hard part's done. I can learn those things, and that what's more valuable is that I've had some more, I guess, relevant in terms of marketing and the modern, selling space. I just have a little more experience that can be applied, and it's a valuable skill set to bring to a small place like Elkton.
So tell me a little bit about the history here at Bradley. Obviously, early on, Oregon wine industry and the first in the area. So tell me about how Bradley got here in the first place, and sort of what you walked into when you came back.
Mike and Vonnie Lant of River's Edge, they were at Elkton's first winery, but it was, decades after the first vineyards went in, and they actually purchased some vines from the man who sort of, twisted my dad's arm or convinced him to plant a vineyard. Ken Thomason was sort of the original pioneer of the area, and my father was building houses in Douglas County, and he was originally from California, but he was trying to establish a career that would be more what is that term? Not the depression, but I'm blanking. Like in an economic sense, a recession. Recession-proof. So he wanted a recession-proof career, and he was thinking farming, and Christmas trees were what he thought was maybe what was going on in Oregon. And I'm not exactly sure of the timeline and or how long it took for him to be persuaded, but I understand that Ken, whose vineyards are just about, half a mile on the same hillside as the crow flies, he mentioned that there's a big open site ready to be developed to be the biggest place in the area. I'll get you started. Vineyards are what you need to plant. So 83, Dad planted, and it took him a long time. I think you have him documented as saying in his interview with you guys that it took him like 7 years to get rolling, because he had to hand water, and he had a lot of vines. And I meet people still to this day who say that they helped get this place rolling. It was years of work. So kids were here watering and just helping keep things somewhat sound, and eventually got a crop off of it. What's funny is that he planted it 2 years before I was born, and then 5 years after I was born, I'm a conscious, I'm walking around, maybe helping, 5 years old, he's getting his first crop. That's pretty crazy. And so I spent a lot of my childhood here, and we farmed. We raised livestock primarily as kids. We were 4-H and FFA kids, but we were in the vineyard a lot. I got to help install a second installation in our vineyard, which is planted in 2001, and that was sort of in the spring, summer. So I got to see and experience that, and ultimately from that, from growing up here, to echo something I said earlier, I just didn't know how much I was being educated at the time, and coming back and or being kind of forced into it, I'm realizing that, wow, I have a decent foundation of understanding of at least vine mechanics and what makes this place operate.
So you come back and you're working for Mike and Vonnie and trying to get your kind of bearings array in there. Tell me about learning the actual art of winemaking and sort of developing your winemaking philosophy, and maybe how that's changed since you started.
I have always appreciated that we and River's Edge both we're just very fortunate to have old vines that produce really dependable fruit. And so that's the philosophy that we've always had, was trust the vineyard to do the work and get out of the way. And that makes it actually quite easy to make wine. As long as we're paying attention on the front end and we pick at the right time, that's if we pick at the right time, we're done. That's it. Like, it's game over. It's like going to be an awesome wine. And I was challenged. 2014 was my first year. We missed a couple of crucial picks. The Riesling was overripe for sure. But the funny thing about an established vineyard is, even if you miss the pick date, the fruit that you get is going to be as good as you can possibly get at whatever stage it's at. So the 14 Riesling, though it's a dessert style wine, it's one of the best dessert Rieslings out there, in my opinion, but in others' opinions too. And these vines just don't quit. We have these widely spaced rows. We pretty much just leave them to their own. If you get any pictures of the vine, it's very natural kind of trellis system. They have wires, but because of the spacing, we really don't thin. We prune and we sucker, and we let the canopy protect from the rain and the sun. And usually by these days, mid-September, late September, we're picking, and we're picking really, really high quality and very clean fruit. So the philosophy is just inborn. It's not anything that is there's no real wisdom behind it. It's an authentic and I think very Oregonian approach to winemaking is grow something as naturally as possible and make it as naturally as possible, something that can age and be appreciated for what it was at the time and how it evolves over time. I think unfortunately a lot of wine these days, and Oregon wine is falling under this umbrella too. Too much of it is just being made to be consumed right now. And we're on a bit of a slower calendar out here where we just want it to be what it's going to be, and we'll release it when it's ready and or when the last vintage sells out. I mean, it just sort of works out that way for us.
Was there something about the winemaking process or being a winemaker that surprised you, that you weren't prepared for?
I guess maybe our philosophy is pretty relaxed, and from whom I've met in the industry, I would say that's unusual. I think a lot of people stress out about their wines and grapes and all of it all the time. And I think the biggest lesson Dad taught me was like, let's say that this rain doesn't stop. Okay, next year we'll have a good year. That this year was almost perfect and then rain came. Okay, oh well. You know, like that's all that we can work with is the weather and our place in this world, and like we have to just accept what will be. And I'm very fortunate. The bad years, quote unquote, are phenomenal. We have some of the best Pinots out there in the bad years. So I'm just like, frankly, and I shouldn't say this too loudly, but I've been like looking forward to a cool rainy year, because we've just had, since I've been back, we've only had hot, phenomenal years, you know, and like we'll shine brighter probably in a bad year because everybody's having awesome wines right now. But in bad years, our old vines still produce a dynamic wine. So I don't know. I feel very fortunate. I feel very comfortable. And that's quite the opposite of where I felt, 5 years ago. I felt somewhat forced. I felt the fortune. I felt all that good fortune of being in my place. But I also felt very overwhelmed and scared that I wouldn't be able to do it. But the fact is, Dad already did everything. It's all done. I just have to be the facilitator, basically,
Don't screw it up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no pressure.
No pressure. Tell me about that. You talk about the kind of overwhelmed, kind of lack of confidence when you start. Is there a moment that you remember where you felt like it's going to be okay? I got this. I can do this. or a vintage? Was there something that happened that you're just like,
yeah,
I'm a winemaker now?
I think that I kind of forced myself in 15 to own it by adjusting our label some. I'd been thinking about how our label could evolve for a while, long before I'd joined the team, as it were. But there's value to, we're only estate fruit, but nowhere on our label did it say estate, and little things like that. I thought we could update the graphic. I thought we could bring our branding a little bit more to the forefront on the label. And so in 15, I decided to claim that marketing side and just be like, why don't we update our label? This will be my transition point. We'll look at our timeline, and like 15 will be that time and that vintage that Tyler claimed it. It transitioned from, I gave Dad all the credit for 14 because it was just, I showed up, grapes were there, we took the grapes, and made great wine. 15 was my first full vintage, so a label change was when I claimed it. I don't know that I really have felt it until maybe this year, 19. I've been feeling much more competent. And my personal explanation is, I think that, if the math checks out, if you've read any of the Gladwell's tipping point, 10,000 hours is expertise. And I think that I'm not near expertise level, but around 10,000 hours is like 5 years of pretty much being focused on something, and that's where I'm at. So I think I'm getting close to competency on our products, and I'm always hesitant to call myself a winemaker because most winemakers I meet can spout about most wines. I can't. I got our menu down somewhat, and I'm feeling pretty good talking about it. And if I can continue to hone that, that's great. And maybe adding a little bit of outside knowledge throughout would be good too.
You talked about bringing that kind of sales marketing background to this. Tell me about what you saw about marketing, selling Oregon wine, especially non-Willamette Valley wine, when you took over, and sort of the process you've had to go through to work on improving the selling.
My, I guess, most relevant background is that I somehow found myself in like a social media director role for a pretty big company for a while, and I've found that is it's an extremely useful tool to be tapped into right now. It's pretty quiet out there in Oregon wine, honestly, on the social media front. I really hope that more of the relevant brands who are cool start tapping into social media, because it spreads faster than anything. But I don't know. I think that my opinions of Oregon wine have shifted quite a bit. When I was in Chicago working, I thought that Oregon wine was like the mecca. And maybe in 2011 through 13 it was more so, but I think it still is somehow out there. Like, Oregon wine is pretty major, and yet I'm extremely disappointed in Oregon wine for the most part. I honestly think that I think a lot of the Oregon in Oregon wine has been lost. I think that Oregonians have Oregonians prioritize food and drink to the point of they spend a lot of their paycheck on good food and wine and drink. I mean, like at beer, food, distilled spirits, whatever, they're spending a decent amount of their money on what they're putting in their bodies. And it used to be that I saw that Oregon wineries were making wines for those people, And yet nowadays, and why I thought it was a big thing in Chicago is that the Oregon wines I see, they're made for the mass market, and it's a thinner Pinot. It's a higher priced Pinot. Mm-hmm. It's not what I think we were established on, and I think more little houses or authentic places need to be directing their focus to what Oregonians drink, because Oregonians, I believe, lead the market. And so while maybe there's a bigger market for weaker wines, if you're going to focus on making good wines, Oregon's going to lead the way. Oregonians will buy it now, and then the rest of the world will figure it out eventually. But I don't know. It's all, you're trying to push a product, and we're at a small scale. So it's easy for me to be part of more of a tourism market where people are finding me and a high quality, kind of low price point wine. I'm just in a very fortunate position to where I can make something really dynamic at a fair price, and also still keep the lights on. A lot of people are struggling to just push out product to keep revenue at a rate in which they're able to employ their people and keep their fancy tasting room up to speed. We're simple out here and humble, and it's a very nice lifestyle.
So you're out here in Elkton, which was previously part of the Umpqua Valley AVA, became its own AVA not too long ago. Tell me about what you've seen change as a result of that, and if that has sort of put Elkton on the map in its way.
For years, we started making Pinot in 2001, and from that point until 2013, our label said Oregon Pinot, because we knew that our Pinot was better than the greater Umpqua Valley, because it's a cooler environment. And now, 2013, when Terry Bramborg, John Bradley, Mike Lant had really pushed hard to get that AVA approval. Now we put Elkton Oregon on our labels, and with pride, because we are, in our opinion, we're Southern Oregon's Pinot capital, and anymore, I'd have to say I think we could become Oregon's secret Pinot epicenter, in that the Pinots are substantial and yet delicate, and they have some body and substance, and they're some people hate California Pinots because they're just fruit bombs, and then some people hate Willamette Valley Pinots because they're thin, and then we're right in the middle of those two places. And so we really do have a very nice presentation of Pinot Noir year in, year out. And the thing that's changed the most is the schedule. Most people say the average harvest is in September, but average harvest in Oregon is October for sure. And we're seeing it creep into September, but last year, I think we finished harvest the first week in October, and people were like, man, what a late year. And it was no, we didn't get rain. It was a perfect year. And growing up, I would be in school. It was well into October, rain for days. I mean, picking in the rain, mold everywhere. I mean, it was just it was a different world. And things have changed. And it's no complaints, really. The grapes are happy. And we have roots that are deep enough that they stay happy. Even in years that we're threatening drought, our vines tend to still produce really high quality stuff.
What do you hope that consumers take away from wines you've made, either here or at River's Edge? What do you hope that consumers get from your wine?
I think, ideally, I'd like a consumer to know that a wine doesn't have to be a natural wine, if you're on that end of the spectrum, for it to be outstanding. In fact, a lot of natural wines are not outstanding. There's a lot of faults in natural wines. We're very close to being a natural wine producer. We do very, very little. We're extremely minimalist in terms of what we do to our wines. So I would say you don't need a lot of ingredients, and you don't need no ingredients. As long as you're doing it in a traditional fashion, working with high quality stuff, you can make an affordable and very delicious and ageable product that is it may not be very accessible. That is probably the downside. You might have to work a little bit to find the people like us that are out there, but it'll be worth it. Especially with the internet being available, you can get anything you want at any time from anywhere. So look for the people who are the small guys producing honest products from, if you can find it, old vines, if not responsibly farmed vines, and you're gonna have a pretty nice experience in wine, I think.
So obviously you're carrying on legacy your father started and your mother started. Tell me what that kind of means to you as a second generation vintner now.
At this point in my career, it means everything, and I mean nothing. I just don't have any need to claim anything. This is a pretty amazing gift that I've been given to do something that I didn't know I loved so much, and if I can raise up my parents for as long as possible, I will. I don't know if they intended that to be my future, but the fact that they built it for me is I'm just in debt, and I'll continue to work my butt off to keep it going as long as I've got the energy.
Awesome. Obviously, a small community here. Tell me what it's like working so closely with family and in a small community like this, in such a small part of a bigger industry.
It's mostly confusing to outsiders. They just don't really get how one day I'm at River's Edge and one day I'm out here, and like, what's that even mean? And are you competitors? And it's hard to fathom, but it's a community. The River's Edge and Bradley wines wouldn't have, I don't think they would have blossomed quite as well had both parties individually done their. Bradley may not have a label to this day. We may still just sell all our crop, but Dad, I credit Dad as the single individual who established this AVA. People came here looking for ground to plant, and he would facilitate what properties to look at all the way through planting. All the way through training, all the way through harvest. He just helped establish this area in a way that is hard to really fathom, that one person could have all these touch points, and at this year it was this family, this year it was this family, and he just sort of got them all rolling. And it all started from the training he got from Ken. And then it paid forward to the wine training. Mike trained Dad how to make wine. And that whole rhythm of just helping each other and sharing knowledge, and it's just carried through. And most of the businesses in town still to this day share in press opportunities, or if we're pruning, we schedule out pruners for every vineyard. We share schedules so that all value is added and nobody is paying extra for any given thing. We try to just compile everybody on the same schedule. Picking is extremely, you'd think it'd be challenging we have a dozen plus vineyards out here, but somehow with largely one crew, we managed to hop from vineyard to vineyard, from day to day, from week to week, and clear it all out in a way that nobody tends to get very upset at one another. I mean, we just all work together, so it's neat. If it gets much bigger, it may be trickier.
Kind of like Oregon in general.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, tell me about what you see for the future for both yourself here in River's Edge, and also for sort of the Elkton AVA as you look ahead.
I don't see Elkton changing a ton in my lifetime. If we get a brewery and a hotel, maybe that will change. If we had some accommodations for people to stay and beer, I honestly think that would really take us to the next level. But I think that Elkton is in this funny little Bermuda Triangle of Oregon that's hard to get to, and thus it's somewhat insulated from commercialism, which is great. Honest entrepreneurs will find their way here, live cheaply, and build businesses, and we'll see Elkton slowly continue to exist. I don't know as far as Oregon in general. I really believe in Southern Oregon's future. There's a lot of diversity in wine in Southern Oregon that is much less so in the Northern Valley. So I think that we're in a neat transition point where Southern Oregon will see some tremendous growth and attention. However, I wouldn't anticipate Elkton getting a ton of that because we're right on that border of Willamette and Southern, and we're Pinot country. So we're nothing new, really. We're old school Oregon, but we've been here forever, and we will be. And I don't know. It's like it's a very, very unique, quiet and undisturbed place that I just can't see changing. My vision for Elkton is Carlton one day. I'd love it to be a little Carlton where it's just tasting rooms and vineyards and total wine country. But we need places for people to stay before that happens. So we'll see.
Sure. What about the future for Bradley? Do you have any changes in mind? Any cool new things you're thinking about trying?
Bradley, we won't do anything drastic. We're gonna do an event a year, probably, maybe two, like concerts. Maybe expand our agritourism overnight accommodations thing, and maybe plant some more grapes. But as far as wine production goes, I'll only scale up as our wine club grows. We're in a very comfortable position of making a very small amount of wines, and we have a very devoted wine club who loves our stuff and is doing a pretty good job of buying us out of stuff. So I'll need to start scaling that up a bit, but the smaller batch I can keep it, the higher the quality, the more loyal our customers will continue to be, and I'm looking for that long-term existence more so than just like a flash in the pan, big popular thing. If it takes a little work on your part to find us, you'll appreciate us even more.
You mentioned the agritourism. We're here in your yurt, so tell us how this came to be and how it's being used.
This was a vision of my father's years ago. Mom and Dad put a yurt up. Cottage Grove is home to Pacific Yurts, and they shopped for a 30-foot diameter yurt and put one up. And it wasn't until I moved back in 2014 that we put it on Airbnb, and we use it as an incentive to wine club members to join. Like, again, we don't have accommodations in Elkton, so it's like I say if you rent a night in our yurt, you get a night if you're a wine club member. So you get 2 nights for the price of one, and you get a private vineyard to yourself in a pretty luxurious glamping experience. And it's been working out really well. I mean, it stays booked. It's a pretty cool. It's on YouTube. You know, we got people who are pretty into it, spreading the word more so than we are, and I just like that we have Dad had the vision of like virality before virality was a thing, and he built this thing that's off the grid. It has no cell service or Wi-Fi. We have a record player and records, and it's like right now more than ever that's needed, where you can just come connect with whoever you need, yourself, your partner, your kids, your dog, whoever you need. Just come and get quiet and listen to music and be uninterrupted from nature and wine, you know. Yeah, it's not too shabby.
Who knew there were yurt fanatics out there who were going to spread the word?
Right,
Apparently
yeah, it's happening, yeah.
So, as you know, Linfield has a wine studies program. You've got a wine studies major here sitting watching this interview. What would your words of wisdom be to someone who wanted to enter the industry today, coming out of school like that?
Gosh, I guess I'd say grab onto anything and just say yes. If you can work in Oregon, great. If you can go to New Zealand, do it. I mean, go anywhere and work for anybody in wine, and walk if you hate it. Like, there's enough going on in wine, even in Oregon, and there are enough egos and jerks that if you just jump in, you're probably going to find somebody you don't like. You'll learn something from everybody. So it's like low risk to jump in. There's enough going on that you have the pleasure of finding your fit in this market now. And West Coast alone, Washington to California alone, you will find something that's perfect for you. I think Oregon is full of opportunity. There's tons of small wine producers who just need help. If you're able or willing to take a room for a few months, an intern, you're going to learn so much. And the more you learn with these people, the more connections you meet, the sooner you'll be in Europe doing the same thing. And the more you can just build that repertoire of like travel, wine, different experiences, then when you come back to start either your own label or work as an assistant and start to influence a label, you're going to have a resume that's unique unto yourself, and that's what makes it the art. You know, there's plenty of science to this, but your experiences and world observations are going to be what make your wine special. It's either that or the site, you know. Wine is about the site or the person, and sometimes maybe both. But for me, it's the site, and for anyone studying it and being passionate about it, I would say go as far as possible and as many places as possible and different regions, and just it's a huge world that you won't get exhausted trying to study, so just try and get it all.
Talk about the differences in the wines that you've made versus the wines your dad was making.
Okay. My father learned from Mike Lant, you know, and Mike, super traditional. Mike mentioned that he learned from one guy, basically, you know, and so there was a pretty small window of wines, and frankly, we're only working with 4 grapes at Bradley, so we don't have a ton of creative room, but I don't know. My philosophy coming into this whole project was, Mike is finite. He will retire and go away. You know, he'll be gone. and he's the teacher and the biochemist. So if I want to experiment, now is the time. He can fix anything I mess up. So really it started with a reserve Baco Noir. I think Dad really coined Baco, or like kind of cornered the Baco, if there is a Baco market in, I don't know. Umpqua Valley, Bradley Baco has been quite the thing for a long time. It's unique, it's powerful, it's very, very good. And in 15, that was the year that I decided to claim as like my transition point. I tried to do a reserve. I was like, let's just see what happens if we oak it up more for more time. And it worked out very well. It was really nice wine. Another one, Gewürztraminer, is kind of an unpopular wine. One that we see other wineries buy from us and then have a hard time selling. They keep lowering the prices and all this. I was made privy to orange wines in 15, and I understood that Gewürz could be made into an orange wine, and I knew we had serious Gewürz. So my entire philosophy is, we have really good grapes. If anything has ever been done uniquely with any grape we're growing, we'll enter that world and be the top of it, or close to. So we made an orange wine out of Gewürz that, it was a small batch and it was super weird, but it hit well and it sold fast. And we have another batch that's even better now that we'll bottle soon. And it's things like that. I've recruited a friend who now works with me at River's Edge, who's pushed the envelope. Now we're making Petulant Naturel wines. So we have Bradley has his first bubbles that slap a label on it this summer finally, and we'll have it out the door. And that's what I think I didn't know I'd bring, was that I could push the envelope in terms of the winemaking too. There's some relevant things that are happening in the world of wine that we could do that we shouldn't be afraid to, and I'm more of a risk taker than maybe a lot of my family. So it's a low risk, you know. You take a few of the grapes in and we try something new, and it turns out to be pretty tasty. It's a fun experiment.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, for your answers, for your hospitality down here and everything else, and we'll let you off the hook here.
Thanks a lot.